family. We were kids growing up there together. And we not only did stuff musically together, socially, we hung out.
I was there and I was supporting her, and I didn't really try to stop her from doing that on the Supremes' time.
And if Dennis ever come close enough for singing My Girl like I do, I'm going to stop. You know? So there it is. Nobody sings Just My Imagination like Eddie Kendricks. I wouldn't care who it is.
Smokey Robinson has named 7 black Motown stars who had hidden their sexuality for decades, from the Temptations, Eddie Kendricks, and David Ruffin. To the Supremes, Florence Ballard.
Eddie and I is definitely a blend. Dennis definitely contributed a heck of a lot to the Temptations.
Robinson was exposing the systematic cover-up that Berry Gordy's empire had orchestrated to protect their billion-dollar image. So, let's get into it. Billy Preston's arrival at Motown in 1979 brought one of music's most talented keyboardists to Berry Gordy's empire, but it also brought secrets that would define and ultimately destroy his life.
My sweet Lord, oh my Lord.
The man who had worked with the Beatles and achieved massive solo success was carrying trauma that stretched back to his childhood. At age 9, while touring with an Amos and Andy production, Preston had been sexually abused by the company's pianist. When he told his mother about the abuse, she refused to believe him, and the trauma continued throughout that summer. A local pastor also allegedly abused him, creating wounds that would never heal and shaping his complicated relationship with both sexuality and faith. Preston's struggles with his sexual identity were known to close friends in the music world, including Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, who later confirmed Preston's homosexuality in his 2010 memoir.
Originally it was Keith Richards played bass, Eric Clapton played guitar, Ginger Baker was on drums.
But Preston's deeply held Christian beliefs made it impossible for him to reconcile his faith with his sexuality, creating internal conflict that would plague him throughout his career. At Motown, Preston found an environment that made his struggle even more complicated. The label's family-friendly image meant that any hint of homosexuality could end a career. Preston was forced to hide his true self behind a perpetual smile and calm demeanor that masked his internal chaos and growing dependence on drugs and alcohol. The breaking point came with his relationship with Kathy Silva, a backup singer who had worked with Sly Stone. When Preston discovered Silva in bed with Sly Stone, the betrayal devastated him completely.
As the minister of the gospel of the Lord and Savior, power that is invested in me, I pronounce that they are husband and wife in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
According to his manager Joyce Moore, this incident was the trigger that caused Preston to stop pursuing relationships with women entirely and marked his descent into cocaine addiction. Preston's time at Motown from 1979 to 1984 was marked by creative output but personal destruction. He released 4 albums during this period, but his addiction and internal conflicts were spiraling out of control. By his own admission, his drug habit eventually cost him $1,000 a day as he tried to numb the pain of living a double life. The label that had given him a professional home couldn't provide the acceptance and understanding he desperately needed. Preston's incredible talent, the keyboard skills that had made him the 5th Beatle, became secondary to maintaining an image that was slowly killing him inside. The tragedy of Billy Preston's story was that he never found peace with his identity until just before his death, when he finally came out during group therapy sessions. The man whose music had brought joy to millions had spent decades denying the very essence of who he was. Eddie Kendricks possessed one of the most distinctive voices in popular music, his soaring falsetto defining the Temptations' sound on classics like Just My Imagination and The Way You Do the Things You Do. But behind the romantic image that made him a heartthrob to millions of fans lay a more complex personal reality that Motown worked tirelessly to conceal. Kendricks was carefully marketed as the quintessential romantic lead, the sensitive temptation whose appeal to female fans was central to the group's commercial success. His public image was meticulously crafted around traditional masculinity and romantic desirability, with every public appearance designed to reinforce his status as an object of female desire. The whispers about Kendrick's sexuality began early in the Temptations' career, as industry insiders noticed patterns in his personal relationships that didn't match his public persona. These rumors were handled with the same precision Motown applied to every other aspect of artist management, with potential romantic partners carefully vetted and public appearances orchestrated to maintain his heterosexual image. Any hint of scandal was quickly suppressed through strategic publicity campaigns that emphasized his relationships with women while carefully avoiding deeper scrutiny of his private life. The machine that made him famous also imprisoned him within a false identity that became increasingly difficult to maintain as his career progressed. The pressure of living this double life took a visible toll on Kendrick's behavior and career choices. He became increasingly reclusive as the Temptations' fame grew, often avoiding public appearances that might require him to perform a version of masculinity that felt foreign to him. His withdrawal from the spotlight was interpreted as artistic temperament, but it was actually self-preservation. Kendrick's eventual departure from the Temptations for a solo career was partly motivated by his desire for greater control over his image and personal life.
In my mind, I had to make it.
You have done it so beautifully. What is left for you? You've done everything. Is there anything that you haven't done that you want to do?
Well, I'd like to do really what I want to do at this point.
However, even as a solo artist, he remained trapped by the expectations that had been established during his time with the group. The emotional depth that made his performances so compelling often came from personal experiences he could never publicly acknowledge. His understanding of longing and heartbreak was rooted in relationships and feelings that had to remain hidden from the fans who loved his music. The isolation Kendricks experienced was profound. He couldn't confide in his Temptations colleagues without risking group dynamics, and he couldn't trust industry professionals who might use his secrets as weapons. The very sensitivity that made his voice so distinctive became a liability in an industry that demanded rigid masculine performance. David Ruffin's powerhouse vocals on hits like My Girl made him one of the Temptations' most crucial members. But his personal life was far more complicated than the romantic image Motown projected.
I've got sunshine on a cloudy day.
Behind his reputation as a ladies' man lay struggles with identity and sexuality that the label worked overtime to conceal through manufactured scandals and strategic misdirection. Ruffin's well-documented battles with addiction and erratic behavior were symptoms of deeper conflicts about authenticity and identity that he could never publicly address. His powerful stage presence masked internal turmoil about living up to expectations that felt fundamentally false to who he really was. The label actively encouraged and publicized Ruffin's romantic entanglements with women, ensuring that stories about his relationships received maximum media attention. These relationships served a dual purpose. They reinforced his heterosexual image while providing cover for the relationships and connections that truly mattered to him personally.
Eddie and I is definitely a blend. Dennis definitely contributed a heck of a lot to the Temptations.
Industry insiders knew that Ruffin's most meaningful emotional connections often weren't with the women who appeared in gossip columns. His closest friendships and deepest relationships existed in spaces completely separate from his public life, creating a psychological split that became increasingly difficult to maintain. The pressure to perform heterosexual masculinity, both on stage and off, created enormous stress that manifested in increasingly self-destructive behavior. Ruffin's substance abuse and erratic conduct weren't just symptoms of addiction. They were expressions of the fundamental disconnect between his public image and private reality. His departure from the Temptations was marked by conflicts that went beyond the official explanations of drug use and unreliable behavior. The tensions within the group reflected broader struggles about authenticity and identity that couldn't be openly discussed or resolved. The emotional intensity that made Ruffin's performances so memorable came from genuine pain and longing that he could never fully express outside of his music. Songs became his only outlet for authentic emotional expression in a life otherwise dominated by performance and deception. The tragedy of David Ruffin's story was that his greatest artistic gifts, his ability to convey deep emotion and vulnerable masculinity, were the very qualities that made him suspect in an industry that demanded rigid conformity to heterosexual masculine norms. Florence Ballard's struggles within the Supremes were commonly attributed to professional jealousy and personal problems.
And I had on this long fall, and I felt somebody jerk it. And I turned around, Diane pulled the fall. And so I looked at her, and I told her, don't do it again. So she ran over and told Berry that I was trying to start something with her.
But the full truth was more complex and painful. Her discomfort with the group's increasingly sexualized image and Diana Ross's prominence masked deeper issues about her own identity that couldn't be expressed within Motown's restrictive framework. The speculation about Ballard's relationships with women was handled with particular severity because it threatened the entire Supremes brand. The group's appeal was built on glamorous femininity and romantic desirability to male audiences, making any suggestion that one member wasn't interested in men potentially devastating to their commercial success. Ballard's increasing isolation within the group wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. As the other Supremes embraced their roles as objects of male desire, Ballard found herself increasingly alienated from a persona that felt fundamentally false and uncomfortable. The pressure to maintain the Supremes' wholesome yet sexy image required constant performance of a femininity that didn't feel authentic to Ballard. Every photo shoot, every television appearance, and every public event required her to embody desires and attractions she didn't actually feel.
Mary and Diana implored Florence to sing again.
Slowly, she started coming back to us, but it took a while for her to start singing again. But you could tell that she was not the same person.
Her struggles with alcohol and increasingly erratic behavior were symptoms of this deeper identity crisis. The woman whose voice had helped create some of Motown's biggest hits was slowly being destroyed by the disconnect between her public role and private reality. The financial arrangements that eventually led to Ballard's departure from the Supremes were complicated by her inability to fully participate in the promotional activities that drove the group's success. Her discomfort with the sexual aspects of their performances became a liability that the label couldn't accommodate. Behind the scenes, Ballard's relationships and friendships existed in spaces completely separate from the Supremes' public life. The emotional connections that sustained her personally had to remain completely hidden from fans and media who might interpret them as threatening to the group's image. The tragedy of Florence Ballard's story was that her authentic self was incompatible with the role that had made her famous. The same talent that brought her success also trapped her in a performance that slowly destroyed her spirit and, ultimately, her life. Johnny Bristol's work behind the scenes at Motown as a songwriter and producer revealed an emotional depth that came from personal experiences he could never publicly acknowledge. His collaborations with artists like Gladys Knight and the Pips and the Supremes created some of the label's most emotionally resonant hits, but the inspiration for these songs remained his closely guarded secret.
Hang in there, baby. Make love tonight.
Bristol's understanding of romantic longing and emotional pain was rooted in relationships and experiences that couldn't be discussed openly in the 1960s and 70s music industry. His ability to write universal love songs came from very specific personal experiences with love and loss that had to remain hidden from public view. The songs Bristol created often contained coded messages and double meanings that spoke to listeners who shared his hidden reality while remaining innocuous to mainstream audiences. His talent for expressing authentic emotion through carefully crafted lyrics made his work both powerful and personally cathartic. Working as a producer gave Bristol access to intimate creative spaces where he could express aspects of himself that were forbidden everywhere else. The recording studio became a sanctuary where emotional authenticity was not only permitted but required for creating compelling music.
Romantic music. Are you a romantic individual?
I believe in love. I think love is very important in everything.
Yeah.
His creative partnerships with other songwriters and producers sometimes provided his only outlets for meaningful personal connection within the Motown system. Professional collaborations allowed for emotional intimacy that would have been suspect or dangerous in other contexts. Bristol's influence on Motown's sound was immeasurable, but his personal story remained hidden even as his music reached millions of listeners. The irony was profound. Some of the label's most beloved love songs were created by someone who couldn't love openly himself. The pressure to maintain his heterosexual public image affected Bristol's creative output in subtle but significant ways. The emotional intensity of his work sometimes reflected the strain of living a false identity, creating art that was more powerful because of the pain and authenticity behind it. His professional success came at enormous personal cost, as he channeled genuine emotions and experiences into art while being forced to deny those same emotions in his daily life. The disconnect between creative authenticity and personal suppression created ongoing psychological stress. Norman Whitfield revolutionized the Motown sound through his innovative production work on classics like I Heard It Through the Grapevine and The Temptations' psychedelic soul period.
It took me by surprise, I must say, when I found out.
But his groundbreaking approach to music was influenced by his outsider perspective and deep understanding of living multiple identities simultaneously. Whitfield's production style reflected the complexity of maintaining different personas in different contexts. His layered arrangements and complex soundscapes mirrored the psychological reality of someone who had to present different versions of himself depending on the social situation. Rumors about Whitfield's sexuality circulated within industry circles, but like other Motown figures, these whispers were carefully managed to protect both his career and the label's reputation. His professional success depended on maintaining a heterosexual public image that was critical for commercial viability in the 1960s and 70s. The innovative techniques Whitfield pioneered, the dense arrangements, unexpected instrument choices, and genre-blending approaches came from someone who understood what it meant to exist outside conventional categories. His music reflected the experience of not fitting into prescribed boxes.
To get bread from dough, you got to bake it. Yeah.
His work with The Temptations during their psychedelic period created some of the most adventurous music in Motown's catalog. Songs like Psychedelic Shack and Ball of Confusion expressed the social upheaval of the era, while also reflecting Whitfield's personal understanding of identity confusion and social alienation. The creative process became Whitfield's primary outlet for authentic self-expression. In the studio, surrounded by music and possibility, he could explore aspects of his identity and experience that were suppressed in every other area of his life. His collaborations with other producers and songwriters sometimes provided cover for relationships and connections that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. Professional partnerships allowed for personal intimacy within the acceptable bounds of creative collaboration. The lasting impact of Whitfield's production innovations can be heard in decades of music that followed, but the personal struggles that fueled his creativity remained hidden. His greatest professional triumph, helping to evolve Motown's sound, was built on personal authenticity he could never publicly claim. Martha Reeves's commanding presence as the leader of Martha and the Vandellas made her one of Motown's most powerful female performers. But her strength and independence also made her suspect in an industry that expected women to be accommodating and traditionally feminine. Her true self had to be carefully managed to protect both her career and the group's commercial appeal. Reeves's natural leadership abilities and powerful stage presence were celebrated in performance but suppressed in her personal presentation. The same qualities that made her a dynamic frontwoman, confidence, assertiveness, and emotional strength, were seen as potentially problematic for her romantic image. The speculation about Reeves's personal relationships was carefully managed through strategic publicity campaigns that emphasized her traditional femininity, while downplaying the aspects of her personality that didn't conform to expected gender roles. Any suggestion that she might be more interested in women than men was quickly suppressed. Behind the scenes, Reeves found herself trapped in a contradiction, expected to embody both the strength necessary to lead a successful musical group and the submissive femininity that mainstream audiences expected from female performers. This impossible balance required constant performance and self-monitoring. The isolation she experienced was profound and unique. Unlike male performers who could sometimes find solidarity with each other, Reeves couldn't confide in other women in the industry who might use her secrets as weapons in the competitive world of entertainment. Her relationships and personal connections existed in spaces completely separate from her professional life, creating a psychological divide that became increasingly difficult to maintain. The emotional energy required to keep these worlds separate affected both her personal well-being and professional performance. The songs Martha and the Vandellas performed often celebrated female empowerment and independence, themes that resonated with Reeves personally, but couldn't be fully expressed in her public life. Her performances became a safe space for expressing aspects of her identity that were suppressed everywhere else. The tragedy of Martha Reeves's story was that her greatest strengths, her leadership, independence, and emotional authenticity, were the very qualities that had to be hidden or downplayed to maintain her commercial viability in an industry that feared powerful women. Within the Jackson 5, Motown's biggest success story, Marlon Jackson faced pressures that combined the label's image control with intense family dynamics and the unique challenges of growing up in the spotlight.
As young kids, that's what you do.
That's what you do.
And I guess I still carry it through from time to time, but there's nothing wrong with laughter, there's nothing wrong with having fun.
As part of a group marketed as the perfect American family, any deviation from traditional expectations threatened not just individual careers, but the entire Jackson brand. The Jackson 5's wholesome image was central to their unprecedented success, transcending racial boundaries through their apparent innocence and family values. Berry Gordy understood that maintaining this image required controlling every aspect of the boys' public and private lives, with particular attention paid to their developing sexuality and relationships. For Marlon, speculation about his sexual orientation began during his teenage years, as observers noted his more sensitive demeanor and artistic interests compared to his brother's more traditionally masculine presentations. In the hypermasculine environment of the music industry, these qualities made him suspect and potentially problematic. The Jackson family's own dynamics added complexity to Marlon's situation. Joseph Jackson's strict control over his sons included rigid expectations about their behavior and relationships, with any sign of non-conforming sexuality seen as a threat to the family's success and financial security. Motown's management of the Jackson 5 included specific protocols for handling rumors about the boys' personal lives. Arranged dates, manufactured romances, and carefully orchestrated public appearances were standard practice, and Marlon was expected to participate in these deceptions like his brothers. The pressure to conform was intensified by the enormous stakes involved. The Jackson 5 were Motown's most valuable property, generating millions in revenue and supporting multiple families and business enterprises. Any threat to their wholesome image could have catastrophic financial consequences. Marlon's artistic sensibilities and desire for creative control were often suppressed to maintain the group's established dynamic. His input on musical decisions was limited, and his attempts to express individual identity were seen as potentially disruptive to the group's commercial success. The transition from childhood to adulthood was particularly difficult because it required maintaining the same wholesome image while navigating increasingly complex personal realities. The expectations that had been manageable as a child became oppressive constraints as he matured and developed his own sense of identity. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.